IPA. So, first of all, what is IPA? IPA stands for International Phonetic Alphabet, and it's used by a lot of different people. It's used by linguists, actors, it's used by singers and translators, and people that want to learn languages as well. It is used to note the pronunciation as close as we can of words or parts of a language, because when we write something in a language, for example, when we write the word language in English, it's not pronounced language. A lot of words are pronounced very differently from how they're written. So the International Phonetic Alphabet, or the IPA, which we're going to call it from now on, was made so that we can kind of more systematically distinguish the vowels and the consonants. IPA is heavily based on the Latin alphabet, but it does also have a few letters that are Greek or just new letters that were created for the IPA. For me personally, my main goal, or my main reason why I learned the IPA, was that I wanted to learn more languages. I wanted to learn how to pronounce languages more efficiently and more correctly. And in my experience, using IPA to figure out the sounds of a language really does help a lot, especially in the beginning if you're just starting out with a new language. So what kind of symbols do we have in the IPA really? We have a few different types of symbols. We have symbols for vowels, like E, A, U, etc. We have symbols for consonants, like a K, P, T, D, etc. And we do have some other symbols that represent different phonetical variations. One thing that's also very important to know here is that when something is transcribed with IPA, you can actually choose the level of detail you want to put into the IPA. There is no one perfect way to transcribe something, because depending on the audience, depending on the person you want to show the transcription to, you can choose the level of detail. If it's a child or younger person, you might choose to transcribe something with less detail. But if it's like an adult, someone that knows a lot about phonetics, then maybe you want to put a lot of detail into the phonetic transcription so that they pronounce it even more correctly. But that's up to you. So for vowels, in IPA, there's a two-dimensional vowel chart, which you may or may not have seen before. I'm going to put it up on the screen right here. From left to right, it goes front of your mouth to the back of your mouth. So there's basically 3 points here. There is in the front of your mouth, in the middle of your mouth, and then in the back of your mouth. And then from top to bottom, it's how raised your tongue is. So it goes from your tongue being very raised to your tongue lying down in your mouth, basically. When it comes to the IPA vowels, you're not really expected to be able to pronounce every single sound here. The most common ones you're going to be expected to know are the ones on the edges of the chart. Those are the ones that are most used in languages, because generally languages will tend to use sounds that are very easily distinguishable from each other. For example, A and E, or E and O. Those are very easily distinguishable sounds. So when you start to use sounds that are more similar, like O, U, things like those tend to evolve over time very slowly. They don't just happen naturally. You may also notice that there are actually two vowels next to each other in pairs on a lot of these. The reason why is that there's the concept of having your lips rounded and having your lips not rounded, basically. Starting from the top left going down, you have E, U, E, A, A. And a language may have both the rounded and unrounded version, or they may only have the rounded, or they may only have the unrounded. That totally depends on the language and the dialect of that language that is spoken. One thing that's also very important to know here is that languages generally do not use the exact IPA vowel sounds. They use sounds that we can attribute to be similar to these letters. But you can think of this chart more as a grid, a sort of Euclidean grid, where a sound in a language can be somewhere on the x-axis and somewhere on the y-axis on the grid. But having the chart as detailed as it is now in modern IPA, we can basically know exactly what sounds they're making and where in the mouth they're produced. So if we hop over to consonants, the consonants may look a bit more intimidating, because when you look at the chart I'm going to show right here, you see that there is a lot of them. But I want to stress that the same thing here as with vowels, Languages do not use all of these. They exist, but the amount of sounds used in a language will definitely depend on the language and the dialect spoken of that language. First thing you might notice is that this is also two-dimensional, just like the vowel chart. At the top here, we've got where in the mouth the sound is produced, and on the left side, usually, we have what sort of technique you need to do to produce the sound. We may have a plosive type of thing. We may have a nasal We can have a trill like r, or br. We may have a tap or a flap. They can be called either. The most typical example is re, like in Japanese, rarirurero. The most common one though, the biggest one here, is fricative. Fricatives are made by keeping a constant flow of air. Things like sh, etc. Then we have lateral fricatives, in which the flow of air moves a bit to the sides instead. The most common example is in Icelandic, where they have the sound sle. Next up, we've got approximants, which are usually the semi-vowels that we have in English, like yeah and we. There's also re in there. And then the lateral approximants, which are the same thing, but with the airflow coming out on the sides, like a le, yeah. On the sort of y-axis here, we've got where in the mouth the sound is produced. So if we start from the left, we've got bilabial, meaning you're using both of your lips. For example, pa, ba, or ma. Then we have labiodental, in which you're using lips again, labio, and there's also dental, because your upper teeth have to bite into your lower lip when you say them. F and V. Next up is the dental, which is made only with the teeth. Examples are the TH sounds in English, like Thor or this. A bit further back, we've got the alveolar, which is made by moving your tongue back to the alveolar ridge in your mouth. If you look at the chart here though, you might see that alveolar and postalveolar have a lot of overlap. The reason why is that different dialects will pronounce a lot of these consonants with the tongue placed differently, but we will hear them as the same sound. So if I say na or na, they sound very similar, but the tongue is actually positioned differently. Typical example of these alveolar sounds, these are sort of like the most common sounds in a lot of languages. You have ta, da, na, ra, sa, sha, etc. You get a lot of these sounds that are used in English at least. A bit further back, we've got the retroflex consonants. Retroflex consonants are basically the same as the alveolar ones, but pronounced a bit further back. So you can distinguish between a ta, ka, da, na, na, ra, ra. After this, we've got palatal consonants, and palatalization is like a huge topic that we're going to learn a lot about later. But for now, palatal consonants, you can think of them sort of as you take the alveolar that you already know how to pronounce, but then you move the middle part of your tongue up to touch your palate. A simpler way of thinking of this is kind of like you put a yeah, like imagine yeah, yes. You put kind of like a yeah at the end, and you pronounce it very quick. So for example, with a K, you can say k, and then you put a tiny y. What the y does is it modifies the k, so instead of k, it becomes more like a kye, kye, kye. For native English speakers, this often happens when you say cute. The k in cute is actually palatalized, cute. The h in hue is also palatalized. A bit further back, we've got velar consonants, which are pronounced in the velum. These are sounds like k as in cake, or g as in gif, which is the correct way to pronounce it. So the next thing we have is uvular consonants, which are made with the uvula. We've got things like the Arabic qa, or we have this like German R sound like re, like in rice. After that, we got the pharyngeal consonants, which are made with the pharynx. These are not very common consonants in a lot of languages. The one I can think of at the top of my head that uses it is Arabic with their ha sound. For example, in the name Ahmed uses the pharyngeal fricative. The final one, which we also do have in English, so it's a bit easier, is the glottal. We have the very infamous glottal stop, which is when you say uh-oh, when you do this and you kind of stop the articulation. There's also the h, as in hello or how are you. And that is about it for the introduction. Today we're just kind of scraping the surface. Next up we're going to talk about vowels, much more in depth, and I'm going to show you how to pronounce all the most common vowels in IPA, and also which languages generally use them as well. If you got any questions, don't forget to write them in the comment section or on Twitter. Also, I stream on Twitch, link in the description. If you go to the channel and you see that I'm live, you can also write the question there and we can interact as well. So next time, episode 2, vowels. I'll see you then.